Right. So now let me introduce Maria. So Maria, forgive my pronunciation, Maria. I'm English, so I'll mangle anything to do with the Spanish language, of course. So María Luz Bort Caballero, I think, hopefully, is an assistant professor in Spanish language and literature and education in the Faculty of Science and Education at the University of Malaga. So she's a colleague of Antonio. She has a PhD in the Spanish language and literature from the University of Maryland, which she received in 2019. Before joining the University of Malaga, she had a postdoctoral fellowship in Spanish literature at the University of Huelva between 2021 and 2023. She's previously taught at Harvard University between 2011 and 2013, the University of Maryland between 2013 and 19, and the University of Isabel I at Burgos in Spain in 2020. Her research interests are many, I think, but two stand out. One is 20th century Hispanic literary and cultural studies, especially female writers, intellectuals, and female Republicans in exile. And the other is has to do more closely, I think, with the topic this evening, didactic approaches to teaching literature in education degrees, with particular attention to the integration of women's literary heritage into primary and secondary school curricula. She's published widely, but I'll just draw attention to a couple of things that she's written. She's both of them actually relate to somebody I'd never heard of. I'm ashamed to say that is my English parochialism, Zenobia Camprubí. So Maria's edited a volume called Zenobia and Co, Writers, Artists and Intellectuals in the Circle of Zenobia Camprubí, and that was published by the University of Huelva in 2024. She's also written a smaller volume relating to Zenobia's Camprubí's educational writings, entitled Two Journalistic Texts by Zenobia Camprubí, and that was published this year, actually, not by Octidro Publishers in 2025. She's published a number of other things, but I think that's probably enough.
Yeah.
The title of the seminar is Teaching to Read, Reading to Question, Critical Literacy in Education Degrees. I'm very glad and happy that you've chosen to speak to us this evening, Maria. So I'll turn it over to you now.
Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to join you. Due to the time limits, and because I tend to spend more than I should, I will be reading my presentation to ensure that I stay within the time allotted. So, first of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee of this seminar, especially Tony Burns, who has been my main point of contact, and also Antonio Nadal, who proposing me and inviting me to participate in this event. I don't see Antonio here, but anyway, I thank him a lot. I would also like to apologize in advance for my English, although I live in the United States for more than 8 years, but it has been like 5 years since I last used it regularly. So I'm starting with a little overview. Spain's current university education context has experienced a worrying decline in deep reading and writing practices, displaced by digital consumption habits and characterized by immediacy, superficiality, and intensive use of artificial intelligence tools. I would dare to say that it's not only a matter of Spain, and it has been happening in our university context in different countries, especially in language education, and in my case, in courses of Spanish language and literature didactics. This study, or this talk, approaches the decline of deep reading not only as a cognitive limitation, but as a challenge for the development of critical literacy, understood as the ability to read, interpret, and question text, discourses, and power relations. In other words, the problem is not only that students read less or understand less, but they are gradually losing the capacity to interrogate what they read, to ask who is speaking, who is silent, which ideologies are being normalized, and how texts reproduce or challenge social inequalities. In consideration, I suggest, after a bit of reflection, I suggest a project-based learning and digital storytelling project that aims to foster critical, reflective, and socially aware reading and writing practices. But after analyzing the situation from a critical perspective, I propose that this didactic intervention aim at the initial training of the early childhood and primary school teachers. These activities promote the development of reading, expressive, and critical skill while consciously integrating the potential of educational technology. More specifically, it seeks to address the central question posed in the title of this talk. How can we move from merely teaching to read to truly reading to question within education degrees, while still incorporating technology in meaningful and pedagogically sound ways as current educational policies encourage? The teaching of Spanish language and literature in university teacher training is facing a lack of motivation to read and deficiencies in reading comprehension and reading expression skills. This talk is based on direct observation and the detection of deficiencies in reading comprehension and reading expression in university degrees in early childhood education and primary education since 2021. Based on teaching practice in Spanish literature and Spanish language for teachers in training courses in these degrees with a sample of more than 580 students with an estimated average of 65 students in 7 groups from different years and levels, 3 first-year courses, 1 second-year course, and 5 four-year groups. Examining all these groups has illuminated a general lack of interest in reading, insufficient reading comprehension, deficit in reading expression, and poor development of critical thinking. Likewise, some ideas outline that integrate the responsible use of technology as an aid to implement improvements in the teaching learning process in the future teaching practice, but not without first dedicating a space for reading and reading expression based on pause and reflection. These courses are usually organized in a theoretical, practical way, since applying knowledge, solving problems, and working with cases in a simulated real-life context are essential for developing professional skills in the teaching learning process. However, for teachers in training in these courses, it is essential to have critical bibliography on language development in childhood education, as well as knowledge of the developmental stages of reading acquisition, text analysis, reading and writing strategies, and reading promotion for primary education. A general literary overview of canonical works in the story of literature and reading for children and young people that promote values such as equality and diversity is also important. An assessment of student reading habits demonstrates a certain degree of shyness or lack of interest in reading. Many acknowledge having barely read a whole book or not even liking the idea of reading. Similarly, an exercise was carried out on reading performance, writing, and literary references throughout their life, together with recognition of compulsory reading during their educational stages. This exercise highlights their memories of some fantastic books or romantic love stories that they found interesting, and an upward trend in self-help books in recent years. This increase in self-help reading itself is noteworthy, especially considering how prominently such titles dominate bookstores, displays, and frequently become seasonal bestsellers. They not only mention a few books by canonical male writers from the last stage of high school that they were included in the assessment syllabus for the university entrance exams. However, they remember them with a certain detachment and rejection, pointed out that reading comprehension was aimed at completed automated forms with specific information about them. Other ways of reading and writing also stood out: brief, concise, and sporadic reading on reels on social media, particularly Instagrams and TikTok, as well as short written posts in social media or writing assignment required for assessment in their degree program. Assessing the quality of reading expression can also be difficult and frustrating task at times, as the decreased use of the artificial intelligence tools undermines the effort put into writing. Providing specific information to ChatGPT which is the most widely used tool among students, university students, generates lingual art and organized text without any thought. The downside of this excessive use leads to a lack of creativity and independent thinking. Most students admit to using it not only as a daily basis to answer basic questions or concerns, even when working on a project in a university course. An example of this is a sample exercise that consists of writing an email as a teacher to communicate to the families of a group of preschool students a series of developmental guidelines on language development, as well as recommendations to encourage it. The activity was carried out in groups of 5 students. Several of these groups did not develop an argument based on the course study, but simply generate the email with ChatGPT with a perfect structure and formal and academic language. Detecting the use of this tool can be easy because the same response pattern is repeated, but it's not always possible to identify, especially in tasks that require more extended written work. In teacher training for primary education session, artificial intelligence was used to create images or adapt literary genres, for example, adapting a children's story into a dramatic script, which produced better results. Similarly, it was used to create songs with a specific semantic field or to give voice and movement to characters and authors. In this case, the potential for creating material with artificial intelligence tool favors the adaptation of resources for a student with special learning needs. However, returning to the main argument and setting aside the benefits that artificial intelligence provides, the development of writing expression is undermined by the uncontrolled use of these tools. This causes a lack of creativity, effort, and independent thinking, an increase in spelling mistake and poor writing and oral discourse development in basic communication practices. It is therefore worth questioning the practicality of completing tasks with virtual submission and without reflective guidelines, or whether if it would be better to focus on improving comprehension and expression skills in a more traditional way, a return to synchronous handwritten activities. Beyond difficulties in comprehension, reading, expression, this trend points out a weakening of critical literacy, a key dimension of teacher education. Critical literacy involves questioning text, identifying power relations, and engages with multiple perspectives. Without deliberating pedagogical intervention, the culture of immediacy, algorithmic mediation, and AI-driven writing risk producing future teachers with reduced capacity for critical interpretation and social agency. In short, the problem is not only what and how much a student read and write, but how they position themselves as readers and writers, whether as passive consumers of ready-made text, including AI-generated ones, or as an active subject capable of questioning, resisting, and transforming discourses that shape their lives and their future profession. It seems obvious that reading and writing are fundamental skills necessary for university students. However, today these practices are becoming increasingly relevant in light of recent response data, studies, and experiences in the academic context. The figure of the avid reader and the phenomenon of the intensive reader are in decline, giving way to a more sporadic and occasional type of reader. Gone is the romantic vision and sensory experience of the smell of a new book, or the feeling of turning the pages as you read in a peaceful setting. Furthermore, the concept of reading as a symbol of prestige and reputation is being stripped away. Admitting a lack of interest in this practice, which previously caused a guilty conscience, is becoming increasingly common. Likewise, the lack of written expression skill and the neutralization of creativity or critical thinking have been mentioned. The rise of social media and technology has led to other ways of reading. For some, excessive screen time has also contributed to a greater disinterest in reading. Faced with these novel realities, it's not a question of evading or rejecting these realities, but rather of analyzing and recognizing a change in trends and habits among students influenced by the emergence of new cultural practices that compete for their attention and have led to a weakening of reading and writing, which until recently were inseparable for higher education. Recognizing this, it is not a question of nostalgically lamenting the past, but perhaps devoting time to reading comprehension and reading expression, linking them to topics that are not from their concerns, and devoting more space to communication skill and development of critical thinking from other approaches. If the current movement, if the current environment around them is creating other ways of relating to, or rather distancing themselves from reading and writing, it will be in the educational environment whether the pause and the dosage of external stimuli that reading and writing require will be found. It is not a question of rejecting new cultural practices, but perhaps combining them and at times encourage the isolation, intimacy, and calm that both tasks require. The emergence of new formats, new technology generates another form of accessibility too, facilitating information and immediacy in summaries, main ideas, or explanatory videos about work, story, poem, play, movie, or new items. It requires less cognitive ability, avoid efforts, and save the dedication and attentive concentration that reading and writing entail. The permanent connection to the internet seems to have caused a resurgence of the need for simplicity and brevity, which even affects our ability to retain attention. Or rather, due to the large amount of stimuli that the mind cannot handle, we are forced to be succinct and thus uninteresting, concise messages that summarize the content of a world event or 15 seconds video that highlights the main aspect of an event, a work, an author, or individual or collective anecdote is becoming more widespread. As for reading expression, less time is devoted to thinking about writing itself, but rather to the immediacy of generating the best requests and instruction for ChatGPT so that it can write a grammatically correct, argumentative, informative, expository, reflective, etc. in an academic and formal language organized at a discourse level and without spelling mistakes. Immediacy is related to the effects of personal satisfaction in terms of productivity and increasingly frenetic, unhealthy, and time-constrained routine. Therefore, it is also a social circumstance that depends on other rhythm, priorities, environments, and access to software and hardware. It is an opportunity that presents new functions such as searching for relevant information from hyperlinks, for example. However, paradoxically, the rapid sequence of images or accelerated and superficial reading poses a risk to memory processes and affect brain development. Furthermore, although there is free access to information, it is not without a certain bias due to the algorithm that filters what we read and how we read it. On the other hand, information is not so free or charged. It is also has an impact on data privacy when we accept cookies. At the written level, artificial intelligence-based reading generation facilitates plagiarism, and if this generation do not have the right information, they can use contradictory or unrealistic arguments. As Emilio Pascual points out in the prologue of a book titled El Poder de la Lectura, the internet has opened up the socialization of freely sharing unleashed writing, opinions, personal narrative, or the reproduction of events, giving free rein to the production of context that is sometimes true and sometimes false, which is used to inform, share, laugh, cry, or complete university assignments. Pascual points out that information overload generates speed and superficiality as opposed to slowness and reflection, but concludes that perhaps the smartest thing to do is to adapt the current context and keep the good that this phenomenon can bring. For example, it might be beneficial to be able to read news, opinion, books, or digital magazines that facilitate access to other types of reading, making it more social and participatory. Although this raises other issues, such as the alteration of the copyright, the lack of criteria and judgment, or the conformism of accepting a superficial message that overwhelms their need to develop one's own critical thinking. Quickly reading tweets or biased headlines, watching a short video, or settling for listening the personal opinion of an influencer leads to a certain social decline on issues that require citizen involvement. The lack of thorough reading on sources to learn about contrasting opinion or stay informed about an event makes it difficult to form one's own opinion and consequently reduce analytical and critical thinking skills. The reach of immediacy and the overload of stimuli on the screen generate frustration with any task that requires discipline, perseverance, and critical thinking. It is therefore incompatible that face such a dilemma. Reading comprehension and oral and written expression skill are required, and innovation in teacher training is also rewarded. New forms of augmented reality and the use of digital support in the classroom for students who are increasingly visual and less receptive to active listening, thinking, and note-taking. Similarly, debates are also beginning to emerge among students who had felt opposed to the excessive use of ChatGPT and to being dependent on this system and unable to remember the last time they created a text themselves. They recognize the time saving in combining extracurricular work with the completion of exercise that requires student assessment. However, they also express fears about a decline in their creativity, effort, and critical thinking skill. The burden and depth are great on a personal level, but the machine is creative enough to solve tasks and projects much faster than the speed of human thoughts. Perhaps it is important to explore the extent to which it should be used, since outside the computer system, there are daily problems or interpersonal issues that ChatGPT response cannot solve. This could also be related, for example, to the aforementioned increase in self-help reading that attempts to target individual complication when much of the problem is collective and social, related to stress, freezing, social isolation. Therefore, human beings are perhaps victims of these rhythms, precariousness, and inconveniences for interpersonal management. It is also essential to consider that knowing how to communicate, convey, adapt, deal with the unexpected, emphasize, and build humans' relationships, which are not understood by computer systems, are also necessary skill for forging a teaching identity. One of the objectives of the education is to prepare students to develop their cognitive, social, and real-life problem-solving skills, enabling them to be competent in this professional work. The ideal situation would be to provide tools for correctly managing digital environment, staying up to date, and even promoting their advancement and study, as well as generating the need for good reading and writing skill, creating interest in the intrigue generated by the plot of a novel, the beauty of a poem, and imagining a play while reading the script, interpreting the thoughts of an author, shaping the social thinking of a text to understand the past, the present, a glimpse of future paths, to revive a taste for reading, to devote time to slow throughout reading, to foster the need for spaces of reflection, tools of understanding and expression, to promote the development of critical thinking as a powerful tool for opinion and individual freedom, and to prepare strategies for analyzing and improving oral and writing communication skills. Focusing on this will subsequently enable trainee teachers to implement reading development plans, encourage critical and analytical thinking in children, and educate citizens in values and good communication skills. Perhaps the analytical and reflective work on a test based on in-depth reading could later be combined with responsible use of technology, innovation, and artificial intelligence. All these elements, information overload, algorithmic filtering, acceleration, and dependency on AI, make it clear that we are not only facing a crisis of time and motivation, but a crisis for critical literacy. If students are constantly exposed to short, simplified contrast and ready-made AI text, it becomes increasingly difficult for them to sustain attention, interrogate complex arguments, or recognize ideological positioning. This is precisely why teacher education must be explicitly address critical literacy as a core competence. At its point, it is necessary to pause and explicitly frame the proposal within the field of critical literacy. Critical literacy is not only the critical comprehension of generic critical thinking, it involves reading beyond the literal meaning to examine how texts construct reality, whose voices appear, whose voices are absent, who benefits from a particular representation, and which ideologies are normalized. From this perspective, texts, whether literary works, official documents, social media posts, or AI-generated responses, are understood as cultural products situated in relation of power, inequality, gender, language, and representation. Reading becomes an exercise in agency. Instead of accepting text as unnatural or neutral, a student learns to interrogate, reinterpret, and respond to it. Some guiding questions of critical literacy include what voices are present and what voices are missing. How are identities, gender, culture, and social group represented? What kind of stories are told, which are silenced? How does this text invite us to feel, think, and act? How could we rewrite or reframe from a different perspective? In our context, this question connects directly with several key axes. Reading and power. Which authors are reading teacher education? Which women writers have been systematically ignored and marginalized? What does it mean to create a more inclusive and egalitarian canon for future teachers? Digital critical reading. How do social media platform algorithms shape what students see and read every day? What does it mean to teach them to evaluate source, distinguish source, discourse, and detect manipulation? AI and critical literacy. If students use AI tools daily, how do we teach them not only to use them technically, but also to read their outputs critically, identify biases, omissions, limitation, and hallucination in responses? Teacher education and critical citizenship. Teachers do not only teach children to read text, they teach them, consciously or not, to read the world. Critical literacy thus becomes a tool for social justice in early education and primary education. In this sense, the reflection that I present situates reading and writing at the center of the teaching education, but always linked to questioning. Teaching to read should lead to reading to question both texts and the social realities they describe. Today's reading practicing are heavily mediated by algorithm. Search engines decide what appears first, social media feeds ranks and high context, and AI systems generate text that appear authoritative. But from the perspective of critical literacy, this raises at least three challenges for teacher education: algorithm visibility and invisibility, as you can see in the screen. Future teachers must understand that what appears on the screen is never neutral. It is the result of invisible decisions that privilege certain voices, topics, and perspective over others. Delegation of thinking. When a student rely on AI not only to check grammar, but to generate ideas, argument, and even emotional tone, they risk outsourcing their thinking and weakening their own interpretive and creative abilities. Treating AI critically instead of banning AI, teacher education should teach students to interrogate AI outputs. Where does the information come from? What is missing? What stereotypes or biases are reproduced? How could this answer be questioned or complemented by other sources? In this context, slow and deep reading is not only a romantic idea, but a necessary condition for critical literacy. We cannot ask students to question text they have not really read, right? So from now on, the last part of the of this talk, I'm gonna suggest like an education proposal based on my reflection, my experience in teaching. So based on the above premises, a working proposal for training teachers digital storytelling that also, the curriculum also like oblige in a certain way to uh, put like innovation in the curricula. I suggest a working proposal for training teachers digital story narrative could be created by using a project-based learning methodology for university students training in early education, in early childhood education or primary education. Meta learning could be carried out with design of materials for the teaching learning processes of reading and writing. To bring the proposal together, I suggest a project based on a story of a female writer, and this would promote the story of a woman who have been traditionally been relegated to the background. At the same time, the aim is to create an inclusive and egalitarian canon with a special emphasis on the study of the life and work of a female author for the subsequent design of materials. A series of texts on the historical, personal, and artistic context of each writer will be assigned. Reading and writing strategy will be used to improve comprehension and expression, including reading aloud, which offer numerous benefits for the overall development of students. This practice also improves critical listening skills, enhances anticipation, and stimulates oral languages. It also creates an atmosphere of trust and motivation towards reading, increasing vocabulary and communicative competence, and provides access to cultural and linguistic content that broadens understanding. Similarly, there will be a specific selective and comprehension reading in order to experiment with different techniques that can be adapted to teaching children. After throughout reading work based on this strategy, time will be devoted to writing skill, which will also involve various strategies: reflective writing for analyze one's ideas, writing for formal and academic communication, writing for research with data collection based on questions, and strategic writing to organize information and improving writing. All the practices will be guided and collected in an individual portfolio. The second part will be carried out through project-based learning, a teaching methodology where students learn through cooperative work by carrying out real and meaningful projects. It is a way also of learning that promotes the development of skill, competencies, and attitudes while acquiring knowledge. It encourages active learning, motivation, flexibility, and skill development. This practice is carried out through a series of actions, interactions, and resources to propose a solution to a real-world task. It will consist on creating a digital narrative with responsible use of technology. The aim will be to create and share digital narrative about the life of a woman author in group of 5 members, previously work on individually, an adaptation of one of their work for children or young people. In the first part of the activity, reading comprehension and written expression will be work on using a compilation of text through slow reading and analysis of their historical, social, and cultural elements. In this part of the cooperative work, digital narrative will be created, one focusing on the life story of the authors, and the other creating a resource based on an adaptation of one of their works for preschool and elementary school students. This second resource will be include the design of digital characters and will help future teachers recreate their reading comprehension through a why not digital adaptation that combines other visual elements. In addition, creative writing will be activated again and subsequently adapted to a digital program for the creation of a story. These strategies put into practice future activities that can be used to create a reading promotion plan for children. Reading also the benefits of digital narratives. Avilés in Arte highlights that within this context, the potential of storytelling expands, providing students with tools to express their knowledge and skills through stories. Thus, storytelling becomes a key that drives creativity and strengthens learning by connecting knowledge acquisition with the everyday reality of the individual. Furthermore, this ability to tell a story is not limited to the linguistic, communicative, or literary sphere, but is a fundamental skill in construction of knowledge and personal expression that is essential for teachers in training. The third and the final part of the project will be a proposal to adapt the digital narrative to special learning needs. In this last phase, time will be devoted to reflective thinking for the creation of the adaptation, and the responsible use of the artificial intelligence will be facilitated for the design, but not for the content. This has already been worked on the aforementioned stages. The first stage involved reflection and work on comprehension and reading expression as an individual process of reading comprehension, and reading expression is developed based on the analysis of the text related to the life and work of an author from the cultural and literary scene. The second stage involved joint creativity. Students collaborate in teams to create digital narrative focused on the author biography and adapts one of her works for children or young people. Third group stage involves a proposal for adaptation with a greater use of interactive visual support. In this final stage, artificial intelligence is used responsibly as a complementary tool as it can facilitate a personalization of learning. For example, through learning techniques based on animated dialogues to facilitate greater understanding for children. Similarly, guided reading strategies can be incorporated to facilitate the teaching learning process. Artificial intelligence has the ability to maintain or create dialogues in natural language and generates response for educational interaction. In addition, the tool maybe enrich the access to educational material with videos and the interactive exercising, offering new ways of learning. But again, the appropriate and responsible use of artificial intelligence can make it a versatile tool for creating courses and activities tailored to the needs of a student. And as for conclusion, and to wrap up a little bit, the general lack of motivation to read and poor reading comprehension at higher university levels are becoming increasingly evident. Excessive screen time, the frenetic pace that increasingly define communities accentuate the need for immediacy and conciseness. Reading and writing comprehension remain essential for critical and reflective development, but in the face of this novel reality, it is essential to integrate digital tools appropriately and encourage responsible use. The combination of slow reading and the responsible use of technologies to create an improvement project for teaching in early childhood and primary education can offer an opportunity to enrich comprehension, develop creativity, and address adaptation to special needs. In this context, where reading and writing seem to have shifted from the center of the university experience to increasingly narrow margins, this talk presents a proposal based on the critical recognition of how the scenario transformed by the intensive use of technologies, the culture of immediacy, and attention fragmentation. Despite the growing disinterest in deep reading practices and the increasing delegation of writing to tools such as artificial intelligence, this talk advocates for the reevaluation of these skills as fundamental pillars of teacher training and critical thinking. The educational proposal developed here responds maybe to the need to create meaningful reading and writing experiences in initial teacher training by placing the study of historically neglected female authors at the center of the project. An inclusive canon is promoted that stimulates reflection, creativity, effective communication, and social awareness. It is essential to recognize the need for inclusive education that goes beyond simply mentioning female authors and instead integrates their works, careers, and thoughts into academic programs in an equitable manner. Likewise, the proposal calls for the critical and responsible integration of technology, artificial intelligence as tool that complements but do not replace the educational process. The proposed didactic progression from individual to cooperative, from reflective to creative, from textual to digital and inclusive, allows future teachers not only to develop their communication skill, but also to implement reading plans and teaching strategies adapted to diversity in their classroom. This reflection and proposal reflect on the need to train technically competent teachers and critical citizens capable of judiciously integrate the tradition of reading with new forms of reading, of learning and communication for the benefit of a more humanistic, equitable, and innovative education. Ultimately, promoting critical literacy, understood as the capacity to read the world as well as the word, as Freire would say, becomes essential to prepare future teachers to question, interpret, and transform the digital and social realities in which they will educate. Critical literacy thus acts as the central axis of the whole proposal, forming critical teachers so that they, in turn, can form critical readers and critical citizenships. Thank you very much. I think that we're in time.
That's great. Thank you very much, Maria. That was very interesting. Oh gosh, right, and informative. And for those who want to be informed, there's a bibliography there also.
Yeah.
Right. So we have about 45 minutes for discussion. It would be great if you could switch your cameras on, then we can all see each other, and it will create a sort of seminar feel. And if you could either put in the chat or raise your electronic hands to let me know and draw my attention to you. That would be great. Let's wait for. There's always a delay, isn't there? Beginning. Let me see. I'm sure I've been jotting down lots actually. So I found that quite stimulating. So I ran off the top of my head, just randomly. I've got a few things that points that I would like to make, but not in any particular order. So don't read into this and anything that isn't there. But I was just wondering. Of course, the main focus on the talk is on reading and writing. Not speaking. And I was just wondering if what your thoughts were about that, because it seems to me that obviously reading and writing are important. It's certainly a necessary precondition for critical thinking. But
Yeah.
encouraging speaking, I think, especially in children, but anybody who's not used to speaking, expressing opinions in a sort of classroom situation, if we're talking about children or students, that seems to me to be quite important too. So I just wondering if you had any thoughts about that, or building in to the curriculum opportunities to encourage people who are going through the process of education to not simply read and write, but also to express themselves orally, verbally, to speak.
Yeah. For teachers in training, whereas the university students, it happens the same as writing and reading. It also like when they need to do an oral presentation, they got stuck. The lack of vocabulary is increasingly noticing. So of course, it's important for oral comprehension and oral expression. But
Mhm.
also, I think that the main problem remains on the lack of reading and also the that kind of rejection of reading. As we read, we get more vocabulary. It improves is the speaking, but also it happened the same since speaking. I found my students when they have to do the oral presentation that they don't know how to express themselves, and they have also a very limited vocabulary to express themselves and also to develop an argument with very limited words.
Mhm. Okay, great. Thank,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Right. Okay. So that was a sort of warm-up question. We now have a couple of hands raised. So Richard and Andreas. So I don't know who raised the hand first, but let's say Richard did, and over to you, Richard.
It's actually my dad's
Oh,
Peter
sorry.
Fowler.
Okay, Richard's dad. Shoot.
Hi, Professor. Thanks very much. A lot of interesting stuff there. I've been invited by Richard, care of Andreas, because I come from a language, text, linguistics, and literature background. I'm now very old and a bit deaf, so you'll have to bear with me. I wondered if you could, for us, distinguish what you mean by the difference between critical literacy and critical thinking, because critical thinking formed a large part of your early part of your presentation, but the kind of theme that you're talking about is critical literacy. How would you distinguish between those two terms?
Well, I think that both are linked. Critical thinking and critical literacy are both related, of course. Probably the meaning of the intention is very, let's say, light between them. But critical literacy, and when I'm talking about critical literacy, is like critical thinking applied on text. So from the text, when we read, we just question what we're reading. In that way, we're also developing critical thinking. Did I explain myself? I can't hear you.
Yeah, I think your mic's gone.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I wonder which is the more generic term, the critical thinking or the critical literacy, because if we talk about critical thinking, that's more generic, more at a higher level. And then the critical literacy, I think you're quite right, focuses on the text. Can I switch to something else? Or am I allowed two questions?
Yes, you
Yeah.
certainly are. Yes, we have plenty of time. That's the wonderful nature of our informal discussion. So shoot, off you go. That's fine.
Thank you. The second one is the importance of reading aloud. Richard and I both raised our brows when you mentioned the importance of that, and this links to Andreas's point earlier about speaking. It also links to the fact that every single teacher must be able to read aloud with meaning. The semantic input, export that comes from that is so critical in teaching. I've spent 50 years in the business of teacher education, and the levels are so low in teacher education that it's only through good practice, attention to meaning, critical awareness that people can read with meaning. And of course, it is linked to acting and stuff like that and literature. And if I can just, some research that I was heavily involved in was I was principal investigator of a big research project where we created benchmarks for the whole of the teaching profession in Hong Kong. This is through English and Putonghua, or Cantonese and Putonghua. And what we felt was we incorporated teachers reading aloud as one of the benchmarks for proficiency. And I wonder how you react to that. Do you, in your teacher education programs, stress or give attention to or create credits for the ability? There's a sort of sad little story at the end of this once you've answered me.
Yeah. At first, my student, when I asked them to read aloud, it's rejection. They don't want to. When I ask someone to come to the front and read like children's story in aloud, they feel embarrassed. But they are teachers and they're gonna be in public with children in a classroom, so they had to do it. So at the beginning, it's rejection and embarrassment, but then when I encourage them to do it, they feel like I'm more comfortable. I try to also like imply myself doing a little bit of dramatically reading with them. Also, it's different if I ask them to read aloud critical text. That would change because that's what you said. The lack of the meaning of the words, they got stuck and they cannot continue on reading. And actually it's very sad that they are about to finish the degree and they still have that kind of missing information from critical text. And it's also not a problem of university education. It's also like a problem from a first levels education, preschool and also primary and secondary school. But I think that when we oblige them to read like a corpus of books, they don't like that. They want to read whatever they want. But actually we'll have also to oblige them to read some things that they are useful for their life and academic trajectory, right? So I think that the way of teaching reading has been mistaken, like from the beginning, like the way of obliging or not questioning or having the good questions for reading. I think that the problem comes from that.
Okay, thank you very much for those questions. Right, so we've got two hands raised, and also two people contributed in the chat. So Andres and Ian have got the hands raised, but let's take something from the chat. So thank you, Melina. I see you want to ask a question, but first I think B was first. So and I see she's actually logged in. So do you want me to read that out, B, or do you want to actually ask it yourself?
Yeah, please.
Yes,
Can you
please.
please?
If you can read it out loud for me.
Oh, yeah, surely I can. Well, in fact, there are two questions, aren't there? So the first is, what industries are being most affected by low literacy rates? And the second is there a list of organizations and government agencies on a global and local level that are advocating for critical literacy and providing education on the impact of AI? So, Maria, can you have a go at those two questions, please?
I wouldn't say that which industries are being most affected. I would say which industry are more benefits from the low literacy rates. Actually, I don't know about the industries that are being most affected. I would say that education in general is affected, but what kind of industries or companies are benefit from that? Well, I think that right now we are in a crisis of the critical thinking, and less than they know, or less that they read, or less that they can express themselves, and which very much constrained information and like the information in chunks that they are what they're receiving with social media is benefit for the critical thinking thoughts, and also for the thoughts in general. Is there a list of organization and government agencies on the global and local level that are advocating for the critical literacy and improving education of the impact of AI? I would say no, no that I know in Spain. We are just from professor university level, we're talking about this. And we're also like concerning that we might need like an ethical project on the AI or the unethical manual for the AI for universities, because I think that is getting necessary, because we are also no we cannot ask for exercises or tasks or activities that they are also made by the use of the AI, right? So I don't think that there is actually like right now currently an organization of government agencies, but we're still questioning and thinking about this.
Okay, thank you very much. So, well, Melina, you've been waiting patiently. So, would you like to ask you a question?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you for this very interesting presentation. And my question is related actually to the use of images, because from what I understood, you also promoted kind of a digital storytelling project, and there kind of the images were AI generated, or there was kind of this use. And I was wondering, since actually, I'm new to teacher education, but as part of my PhD, I'm actually promoting something like critical visual literacy for visual arts teachers. So I was wondering if you noticed any kind of I don't know if there's a different approach to images than to AI generated texts. If there is, I don't know, yeah, if there's maybe less less fear of contact, but also if there is a critical reading towards the images, or if they are very much used illustratively without much reflection. I don't know. I would be curious about that element.
Yes,
Thank
that's
you,
a
Melina.
good question.
I think that's a good question. Actually, the way that we are using images is also like the same. Like I always feel, and also my colleagues, that we are always feel like trapped between innovation and technology in the class. And also trapped because we're having actually like we're having a problem of critical thinking and critical and cognitive abilities also because of this. But the way that we're using images is, for example, if they need to create or like to adapt a children's story, they try to always give the AI the same patterns. It doesn't work very good because it tries to generate again and again another image unless you pay the premium, I don't know, whatever dot like 5.0 whatever. It tries to give you more accurate. But actually, I think that's a good question for the student to reflect because the way that the AI create images is always filtered by gender, race, etc.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. That's yes, I suppose it's not just critical thinking, is it? It's expression as well. So and that does apply to images just as much as to anything else. I mean, you can download an image, or you could paint a picture yourself. Or there's a very big difference between consuming something that's been produced by a machine, especially by a machine, and actually being as an individual creative when it comes to the production of images. I mean, that's an important thing. So, Andreas.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Maria, for the very thought-provoking, excellent talk. And in a way, I've got two half questions. So you seem to assume that critical thinking and critical literacy skills is the desirable thing to have. I think we here in the room would probably agree, but that's not necessarily the case. Yeah, when you sometimes think, even from a government point of position, I think in the UK they push a lot, or people should be able to should focus on English and maths. Yeah, so you've got to be able to do the sums and you've got to be able to write, to communicate, but they don't really think in these terms of critical literacy skills. So I think as a starting point, one needs to acknowledge that. And then actually your proposal is already quite a radical move in itself. And I support it, yeah, as a kind of a progressive project. And my second question is, I very much like the kind of proposal of how we can have this critical literacy, how we can communicate that and transfer that to our students. And I also like the way that you said, and then as a third step, we bring in AI because it exists, yeah, to tell students, oh, you shouldn't use it. This zero strategy. It's more the kind of responsible use, which is important. But then don't we also have to think about the wider setting of education? So in the UK, we are now faced in a situation where students leave the university with average debt levels of £50,000 plus because of the high tuition fees. A lot of our students now have to work part-time, so they don't have the availability of dedicating themselves to their studies as they were able to in the past. And there's lots of pressure on them already while studying, actually, to look for the next job. So I've got lots of third-year final students who, instead of focusing on the topic, they went to university to study. They're already in all kinds of job interview preparations and so on. And so just your thoughts on this interconnection bit. Yeah, okay, on the one hand, we want them to become critical thinkers, but don't we also need to look at the wider environment within which that can take place?
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you. Of course. I think yes, we need to be conscious and aware of the context. Also students in Spain, they are working like part-time, they're working like during the afternoon, they have class in the morning, they don't have time. But maybe we have to consider that we need also a space in the classroom to reflect and to pause and to maybe like encourage them to critical thinking, because we can be efficient practice in life, but what about humanities, and what about like one step more, like stepping more like about the why we're doing this. Like we need to pause and we ask ourselves why we're doing this, why we're reading this, why I need to do this, why is this for. So, of course, I think that we need to be aware of the context. It's getting like really difficult for them, or like also to study nowadays because of the fees and that kind of stress of the life that we're having, and we're getting like more stress and stress. But like at the same time, we might like in language and literature classes, like courses, we might need to think about dedicate a space to pause and question and reflect. That's my opinion.
Okay, Mary, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Bees just said
Thank you.
in the chat, I see more and more young people going to trade schools rather than four-year universities courses here in Los Angeles. So thank you for that, Bee. Right, Ian, you have been waiting very patiently, so over to you.
Yeah, that was fabulous. Thanks. And provoked so many thoughts. And they may come across as a very disconnected question. But I did my first degree was in engineering. And I think we were taught not to think critically. And when I started, or to read much, actually. And I got into a lot of trouble by reading and finding out there were debates around subjects. And that didn't go down very well. I've also been involved in the cooperative movement. And that tends to mean that you ask lots of questions and that you seek to build a collective view. And that's got me into a lot of trouble recently with people on the left, actually, that don't like critical analysis of what they're saying. So, yeah, we live in a difficult world. And but have you come across Henry Giroux and his writings on fascism and education and the current context? Because I think that is relevant, and also Victor Klemperer, The Language of the Third Reich, which looks how language is condensed, and George Orwell to prevent thinking in particular ways. So I think we live in that bigger context, don't we? And you're bravely trying to unlock people's minds, and I think that's wonderful. But the other thing that I involved with the co-op movement, there's been a conference in Turkey over the past month or so on cooperative AI. So what would it mean to rewire AI to be actually a cooperative resource rather than a sort of mind control thing? And I don't know if you've come across that, because it sounds like you've probably got a lot to teach them or to offer in that context as well. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but thanks for stimulating it.
Thank you. I think that you raise up like also another topic that is very much related, like talking on like fascism on education right now, and also how like the politics on certain ideological ways raising in young people. It has to do with this. Like less you read and less you know, is easier like to push you another thoughts, that because it doesn't need to question. And right now we're living in a world that is intimidating, but that kind of discourse of women working and immigrants that are coming and all that kind of discourses that are affecting, like also like the way like that they try to push like young people, that they are kind of like constrained to that kind of thinking. And I also that is a tool. Like if we're going to the past, like if we review the past, the way of atheism is to indoctrinate, not to educate. So it's happening like in a very like smooth way, but it's happening also in social media. It's increasing like in like day by day. And it's very interesting because in the last past weeks, every time I go to my school, to the University of Malaga, the Faculty of Education, I also was talking to Antonio the other day because we found some stickers on fascism in front of the university. So I'm getting very worried about this because they are not questioning anything. They are just like going like through where they're like thinking, but they are not reading. They're just like watching videos and say, "Oh yeah, yeah, they're right, they're right." So they are repeating the same pattern. Um, that's one thing. On the other thing about I don't think if I understand well the second question, but I don't think that we can actually, it's a reality, no? The use of the IA. We cannot do like anything they are using it like for everything. But maybe we can teaching them to why we're listening, for what, and why don't we use it in an intelligent way, like in a clever way? Why don't we like for teachers? I think that's a great tool for special needs. They can adapt it some images, or they can adapt it like some language also for special needs, or for being like more visual, or have like a visual support. I don't think if I answered your last question. Maybe no.
I'll put something in the chat, a link to the
Yes, I was going to say, Richard's asked if you could the works that you mentioned. Well, he just refers specifically to the second one, but perhaps you could put both of them in the chat. That would be great. So now B's also written something in the chat. So Alif, I know you've got your hand up. I'll come to you in a minute. Let me see what we've got here. So B tells us that she ran a student-run seminar at the University of California, I guess that is, Santa Cruz, for 2 years. And two key texts were one, All About Love by Bell Hooks. The other, of course, was Paulo Freire, the Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Now, Maria mentioned Freire right at the end there, of course, about reading the world as well as reading the word. And that actually, that stimulates me to make a point about Freire, because of course, in his case, it wasn't children, was it, or young adults? Let's see, it was mature adults, specifically the peasantry, and the issue being literacy amongst mature adults, amongst the peasantry in Latin America. So I was just wondering. What do Maria, you think the implications are for your approach to pedagogy generally, for not for children, but for adult literacy?
Okay, sorry about that, but I was reading at the same time and
All
probably
right.
missed your question. Can you repeat that, please? Sorry.
Well, I was just because B mentioned Paulo Freire, and you did also at the very end of your talk, and of course, he in the Pedagogy of the Oppressed, he's interested in adult education amongst the peasantry in Latin America. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were about the. Actually, I personally taught at a division of adult continuing education at the University of Sheffield for a while. So I'm just interested in the significance of what you've been talking about for adult literacy and adult education.
Well, I think it's basic, right? Like if we don't have like adult education and we still like kind of like training ourselves in questioning, we still like having that kind of patterns or models for children, it's gonna be very restrictive. Like if our adults, teacher trainers, are not, they don't have like the skills or the tools for questioning, they wouldn't have the tools for teaching in a proper way.
Mm. Sure. I suppose one of the things would be, will it affect the dynamics of the power relationships within the classroom, wouldn't it? There's a very big difference between being a teacher in a classroom context where you're dealing with small young children, or coal miners doing day release courses. I mean, it does affect the way it must affect the way that you see your own role and how to go about engaging in the teaching process in a classroom situation. Anyway, that's just a comment. So, Elif, you've been waiting very patiently, and then Richard, but first Elif.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria, for the really thought-provoking presentation. I felt closer to some of the problems that I've been experiencing during teaching. So I find it very contemporary and appealing to many of the issues that I find myself struggling to find the correct position. Let me give you an example. A lot of students start to tell me when I ask them whether they had the chance to read the assigned material, they start to tell me that they put the assigned material, articles or chapters, in AI. Then ChatGPT prepares a summary in 5-6 pages. And then I find myself puzzled about how to answer or what to say. And often the conversation ends me defending reading, like it's good for your neuron system, it's good for your deep reading skills, etc., etc. And I don't know where the conversation goes with the generation university students. I was not a fan of banning AI, and I think, but it's not like fully opening to AI. So where shall we draw the line? Perhaps, I also find the students using mobile phones and losing the focus during the lecture in the setting of the classroom. And then I ask myself, shall I ban it? No, that's not what I want to do. Then I find myself having a joke, trying to just, because I read the book Stolen Focus, and it's also true. And it's even worse for the next generation, like the short video generation, they named themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the headline generation. I always said to them, like, you always like only read the headlines, but you don't read the article, right? So it's the same thing that is happening. Why they're using AI to generate the summary, like to summarize a text, because it's quickly, but they don't focus. They are not interested in reading. What are you asking for? They just need like the key ideas or the main ideas, and that's it. That's why they need for surviving in university. But I don't think that they are in university for surviving. They are in university for learning and and having an academic trajectory that encourage them to be like better citizens in whatever disciplines they are studying, right? So yeah, we are trapped. I'm also like I agree with you. I don't want to ban the AI, but at the same time, what is that for? Just for summarizing? Why? Because you don't have time, or because you don't need to focus, right?
Thank you. So, Richard, or is it Richard's dad? I don't know. Is it you?
No, it's me this time.
All right. Okay.
Thank you very much for your talk. And just on that last bit that you were responding to is, I remember reading about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, longer actually, the metaphor of living life now is like being a World War II fighter pilot. You're in your cockpit with the canopy, and you spend your whole time like scanning for threats, and you need to do things very quickly, otherwise you die, the survival thing. And so, yeah, you got to have some sympathy with the students because, as you say, they need to survive university. It's not them that created the conditions within which they're having to study, and they have to pass this test and that test and go and do a job and everything like that. My question was about education a bit more generally, not just about critical reading. And in a different reading group, we recently sort of maybe identified that there was a lack of specific writing by Marxists around the topic of education. So yeah, we talked about Giraud and we talked about Freire and a handful of others. But I was just wondering that apart from Freire, in Spanish language, are there any sort of other canonical texts that specifically focus on education and a Marxist approach to education, if such a thing exists, that you might be aware of because you're a Spanish speaker?
Yeah. Well, we also like in my class, we also read, as the other colleague says, bell hooks. I think that's also a very like a very good text. Also, we read Giannini Rodari, and that is also a very good, like also for language, it's a very good one. But I think that like actually right now the discourses of education, there's like a lot of information right now, a lot of articles of education, but actually are all of them like answering our questions? Because I also have the feeling that the bibliography is like increasing, but I don't think that all bibliography are saying like things that we can use. So actually right now I think that bibliography of education in Spain is like incremented so much. But I don't think that sometimes they're like saying the same thing. I don't know if it happened the same, in your countries, but it's the feeling that I have. So I also like read Maria Montessori pedagogical strategies, for example. Like it's not only I'm very like maybe international in that way, that I don't focus on only on the actual or the current Spanish discourses on education. Of course, I'm aware of them, but I'm not very much like very like aware of, or just only have in mind one of them. I also have like a large biography for doing this talk that I can share to you. That are also like main of them. They are like Spanish colleagues that are also like talking about this and other kind of strategies or implemented technology with education. But yeah, and I think sorry that I skip maybe your main question, but I think that you said something very interesting. I also feel that right now our students, they don't have the sense of community. Like they feel, as you said, that they are living in a video game. So they are just like all the time, like jump all the things that they are like encountering. But at the same time, it's very sad that they are not living the university experience as we probably we live in the past. They don't have the sense of community. They don't have like a convivency. Like they don't do things together. They just go to class, do whatever they need to do, and go. So they are not thinking also what kind of a space is university, because in university, a part of questioning in reading and writing, you can question more things, and it's not happening.
And arguing and speaking, living in the cockpit, as Richard said. If you're isolated in your room, staring at a computer screen, you're not out there in the coffee bar discussing things with fellow students, are you? I mean, that's yeah.
Yeah. At the same time, that kind of self-help books that we're increasingly seeing and in all the bookstores, I think that is very kind of like worrying situation that we're having, because they are not thinking that there is a collective problem. They are thinking that they have a problem like as an individual, but it's something that we're suffering as a community, as a society.
I think Marxist concept of alienation is relevant here, actually. Perhaps it would need to be adapted somewhat, but it's the same basic idea. And of course, we are talking about a situation in which somebody's being encouraged to be excessively individualistic. And of course, that sense of community isn't there. And if you think education is a sort of communitarian project, as it were, then that's obviously one reason for thinking that what's going on is not good. If you're interested in education, there's a difference between teaching and education, of course, and training. So conceptually, these things are very different. So I think we're running out of time, actually. So does anybody else have any point, question, observation? If not, I'd like to make one. If you don't, I hope you don't think I'm talking too much. So I've retired now, but when I was teaching, one of the things I did, I taught utopian and dystopian political thought and literature. So I'm quite interested in the connection between critical thinking and creativity and imagination, and that's sort of what I had in mind earlier on when I was talking about the images, artists producing creative images. So if one's thinking about the context of utopian and dystopian literature, connecting it to what you've been talking about, one obvious thing, and I think it's already been raised, Orwell and Newspeak, and the limitation of vocabulary, the actual sheer number of words, as it were, that are available to people limits the capacity to think, and that's obviously an important thing for George Orwell in 1984. But the other text I'm particularly interested in is, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but presumably you are, Zamyatin. You have Jenny Zamyatin's novel We, which he wrote in the 1920s, because Zamyatin was very interested in the issue of political significance of the encouraging of the creative imagination, or on the one hand, or the suppression of the creative imagination on the other. And I think AI and reducing students to a condition of passivity rather than active creative thinking and expressing is one of the things that Zamyatin certainly had in mind. Central to his novel is an operation. He calls it the fantasyectomy, where basically it's a lobotomy, where in this dystopian society of the future that he's talking about, the capacity to think creatively outside of the box about new and different things in new and different ways, different from what we've currently got, is literally suppressed by an operation, a surgical operation. But obviously the theme is closely connected to what you've been talking about. I think it's sort of imaginative elaboration on some of the ideas that you've presented to us in your talk.
Yeah, what if we just only like get the output without giving the input to think? It's just like very straightforward. It's just like not just to do like anything, just stay there and just maybe we can see the time pass and how things are changing by themselves, because just they are like a very short amount of people who decides on others. But at the same time, yeah, what about creativity? Like why that kind of development also of our thinking, and also as a teachers is a very empowerment tool. You need to create every time, because every time happens different things in a classroom, right? So you need to have the capacity to create as a teacher and for everything. But like I think that for teachers is very important.
So I think this is an aspect of basically consumer society, consumerism, because that's what consumer society does. It reduces people to the state of passive consumers of product that other people have or machines have produced. And so one could quite easily, I think, broaden the scope of the analysis and take it outside of the classroom and connect it to a very broad ranging critique of contemporary society, which of course is a capitalist society.
Yeah, that's the main goal. Yeah.
That's what we're talking. Right. Okay. Well, so my clock says 7:30. I do apologize. I've been abusing my position and talking too much, but
No.
right. It's time to stop. Thank you, everybody, for attending and the contribution. I really enjoyed the discussion and, of course, the paper. That was great. Thank you very much indeed, Maria.